Hi everyone, welcome to today's show. I love these episodes. I have to be honest with you. I love these shows with this gentleman. His name's H.G. Tudor. We have done two incredible shows about narcissism. I really highly recommend that you go and watch those for a bit of context as well. But today we're going to be talking about H.G.'s new book called The Psychopath. Nice and clear. It says it exactly what it says on the tin here. H.G., how you doing, my man?
I'm very well, John. Thank you for inviting me on. Looking forward to having a vibrant discussion with you, like on the previous occasions.
Yeah, it has been very vibrant, and yeah, don't think I've ever been so gripped, because there's so much that I want to ask, and then I finish the show and I go around going, oh God, I wish I'd asked that, I wish I'd asked that, because it's
Well, you see, there's the advantage of being able to speak to me more than once.
there we go. Yes, I'm glad I'm glad you keep coming back anyway. That's good. But we've talked about narcissism, but also you are, and it sounds to me, it almost sounds wrong saying this, but you are a psychopath as well, correct?
That's right. Yes. So I fit the hybrid of being both narcissist and psychopath, and I'm, I would say that I'm more psychopath than narcissist, so that I am led by my psychopathy, and my narcissism naturally plays an important role also. But if you were to think of it like a left hand and a right hand, the psychopathy is more dominant in terms of what that means with regard to me and the way that I behave.
Okay, so because we've done quite in-depth episodes on narcissism, but now if
Yes.
we're going to talk about psychopathy, how do we know in your behavior what's the left hand or the right hand or what would be sort of ambidextrous in that metaphor?
Okay. There are the clinical definitions. So you have narcissistic personality disorder and the criteria that have been established as part of the DSM in support of that. And as we've spoken hitherto, I, through my work, have expanded on what that means to flesh it out, to explain more about that perspective and so forth. And the fundamental aspect of the narcissism is the pursuit of the prime aims. So, without going into too much detail about narcissism again, essentially, when a narcissist has some form of interaction with a human being, an appliance, their activity is governed by the pursuit of the prime aims. So that's control, fuel, character traits, residual benefits. Always control, usually fuel, maybe character traits, maybe residual benefits. With psychopathy, psychopathy isn't an actual diagnosis. The diagnosis is antisocial personality disorder, again, as per the DSM. Psychopathy is, if you like, a position along the branch of antisocial personality disorder. And I make reference to being a psychopath because people are more familiar with that. And you keep saying it's antisocial personality disorder. Like, yeah, well, what's that? Because it's a relatively recent development to describe it as such. But you'd never get a clinical diagnosis of psychopath. But I use that term because it's got such a familiarity with people when they're accessing my work. And I've explained that there are naturally certain elements that are associated with what makes somebody, including me, a psychopath, but also that those criteria come together in the pursuit of what I call the necessary triad. And the necessary triad is control, stimulation, and accumulation. So, for those who've been paying attention, they'll recognize there is an overlap between the two with regard to the need for control. And as a hybrid, I don't have the same fuel needs as a pure narcissist. In other words, I can go for a fairly sustained period of time where I don't have interaction with any human being. Because if I don't, there's no necessity for control in the sense that I'm not physically dealing with somebody. If they come up on my radar, I can just deal with them in a sense by jettisoning them, saying, well, I don't need to deal with that individual. That gives me that innate sense of control, which is the third assertion of control, staying in a position of withdrawal. Because my fuel needs aren't the same, I don't need to interact with people to draw that fuel. And I can be stimulated in certain ways without the necessity of human interaction. So, for instance, that might mean undertaking some research. It might mean reading books. It might mean watching films or television programs. It might be painting. It might be composing music. It might be working on my material to tell people about narcissism and psychopathy. It might be honing certain of my skills. It might be going out to a firing range. It might be undertaking some archery. All of those different things would provide stimulation. So, by way of example, during January, I've been less prevalent in what I call blog world as a consequence of the fact that I've been engaging with certain professional matters in the land of ice and snow. And for a 2 week period, I barely saw or had any communication with another human being. Now, were I a pure narcissist, that could be potentially problematic for me because fuel levels would drop. But as I mentioned earlier on, because I'm more governed by my psychopathy, that isn't such an issue for me. The bigger issue for me in such a scenario would be boredom, because I have a very low boredom threshold, and therefore I require that stimulation. And that's what human beings are to me, stimulants. But they're not the only one. So I can gain that stimulation from other things, but of course, dealing with human beings provides a stimulation in essence by playing with them like toys, which provides entertainment, which equates to stimulation.
So that stimulation is equal to the psycho. So can we talk about this in terms of the psychopath in you and the narcissist in you? Is that too crude, or does that still make sense, sort of
No,
in
that's fine.
conceptually? Yeah.
It's fine to describe it as such.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that I was going to say then, what is the key drivers for both? So obviously the narcissist wants the supply, the control. It satisfies your boredom. It sort of stimulates you. The psychopath, is it? I've written this down here as well. It still needs the stimulation or not, or is it a slightly different
So,
motivational drive?
so for the narcissist, it's
Yeah.
the prime aims.
Yeah.
So that's control,
Hmm.
fuel. I don't like supply, fuel.
Fuel.
Don't like the term
Okay.
supply.
Yeah.
Okay. Character traits and residual
Sure.
benefits.
Yep.
So those are the four items that are required by the narcissist. Now, with the narcissist needs people because
Okay.
those four things are linked to people. Okay. So if the narcissist is on their own and they're not thinking about anybody, there's nobody to control. So the issue of control drops. Okay.
Hmm.
However, at some point, they'll need some fuel. So they're driven to interact in some way. They don't necessarily need character traits, not immediately, but to acquire them, they'll take them from people. Therefore, they need an interaction with a person. Residual benefits, they will come from other people. So what happens is, to pursue fuel, character traits, and residual benefits, the narcissist is motivated to interact with people, and they must also then control those people that they are interacting with.
Yeah. Mm.
Okay? So that's what the narcissist does. With the psychopath, if there is an interaction with an individual, control is a factor. It's also the case that the psychopath requires stimulation. Often that is provided by people, but not always. Accumulation can also be provided by people, but not always. Accumulation, for instance, could reference, and commonly is the case for certain psychopaths, money. Or it might be an accumulation of Star Wars figures. Or it might be an accumulation of
Really?
notches on the bedpost. So that brings in a human for that element. So those are the destinations. So for the narcissist, it's destination prime aims. For the psychopath, it's destination necessary triad. And then the way that the narcissist or psychopath, or in my case, both, have been created is to be furnished with particular aspects of personality which assist the gathering of the prime aims or the necessary triad in the most effective way. So, in a similar way, if I was to throw you into the sea, okay, I don't know how strong a swimmer you are, but there's a good chance that you wouldn't survive more than a few hours in the sea. If I said to you, you now have to live in the sea, well, you'd probably be dead by the end of the day because you'd drown. A shark is created, designed, if you will, to live in the sea. So similarly, the pursuit of that control and the stimulation and the accumulation, I am equipped, and in some instances don't have certain things that would be a hindrance, for instance, emotional empathy, so that I can gather those things with a greater degree of efficacy. So that means, for instance, I have the glib charm that is a criteria in relation to psychopathy, because that enables me to control people. It allows me to interact with them, to seek stimulation, and it causes them to fall under my spell so that I can accumulate that individual. There is an absence of fear, which enables me to seek stimulation in a particular way, and it may aid with accumulation. So let's say, for example, my absence of fear led me to be somebody that regularly undertook armed robberies of banks. Therefore, I could accumulate money that way. My psychopathy. Of course, there are non-psychopaths that would engage in that behavior. There are plenty of criminals that aren't psychopaths. But my psychopathy is designed to enable me to achieve those things with a greater degree of efficacy compared to someone who doesn't have that personality type. So the various factors in terms of the absence of emotional empathy, the ability to embrace deceit, the callousness, the absence of regret, the absence of guilt, the absence of conscience, all of those factors that come together, the failure to abide by social norms allows me to achieve those things with a greater degree of consistency and ability. The fact that I have no concept of responsibility because I will shirk it appropriately, freeze the shackles to enable me to achieve those things. So those are the three things that I am driven to pursue with regard to my psychopathy, and I am designed or built, if you will, with certain attributes and an absence of other ones so that I am able to get to those three things more effectively.
Okay, and as a result of that, what have you been able to achieve so far?
You mean in my life?
So things like, accumulation, for instance, is this, would yours be, monetary? Would it be money? Is it Star Wars figures? Like what sorts of things have you accumulated and what have you
Okay,
built
so
up?
well,
Yeah,
some of the things that I
yeah,
can make mention of, there are some
okay,
things I can't tell you,
okay, yeah.
but there are certain things in terms of accumulation is that I'm well off financially, so
Hmm.
that's part of that. I have had a lot of sexual partners, so there's an accumulation in that regard.
Hmm.
I have a particular network in relation to the provision of information and power, so I've accumulated individuals in that regard. I have a particular collection of items. I'm not going to say what the items are, but again, I've accumulated those. I have accumulated many, many victims. That's a form of accumulation.
Hmm.
It's the collection of people, you see, the idea that they
Right.
belong to me and I have been able to collect them. There's a collection of experiences also in relation to things that I have done, some of which I've written about, some of which I'm about to write about, some that I may tell in the future, some I may take to my grave with me. But there's
Mm.
all of the accumulation of those experiences. I am not the type of individual that spends 2 weeks on a sun lounger in Lanzarote staring at the horizon, because that would drive me nuts. It's a complete waste of time for me. There's always things to do. There's the accumulation of my followers in relation to my work. There's the accumulation of the books that I've written. So those are aspects of accumulation. And this is why, for instance, when you might look at a billionaire and think they've got these huge amounts of money,
Yeah.
why is it never enough?
Mm.
Because many billionaires, not all, but many are psychopaths, because it's the accumulation you're witnessing. It's never enough. There is never a point at which you say, that's I've got enough. There's always the capability to go and get more because that lends itself to the accumulation and in part stimulation as well. When you become bored very easily, you need to find things, in essence, that will draw your attention. And invariably, that's, for instance, taking over a company so that a rival doesn't get it, or taking a company and asset stripping it, or invading a nation, or inventing something and then ensuring that it's rolled out across the world, accumulating people so that you have them in your pocket. And Jeffrey Epstein's a good example of that. The way
Yes.
that he accumulated people, because to him, like any, I've explained in one of my recent videos that he was a narcissistic psychopath. If you
Mhm.
accept that he's dead, or is a narcissistic psychopath if you think he's still alive somewhere, because obviously there are some people that believe that to be the case. But let's proceed on the basis that he's dead. So what he did was that he accumulated people in the sense of mainly women that were used as lieutenants to draw in women that could be then be exploited and used in relation to powerful and influential figures. And he wanted to collect those individuals, members of royalty, politicians, business people, because then he found that stimulating the accumulation of those individuals. The accumulation assisted also with the issue of control over other people, and it was in essence a great big game to him. How can I get the influence over this person? Who do I know that might be able to assist with regard to this? And so he created this vast network of individuals, accumulating them through the application of, in some instances, financial largesse, in other instances, financial control, in other instances, blackmail, in other instances, out and out threat. And so he was driven to create that pervasive network because of his psychopathy.
Mm. And would you say if that need to control and accumulate, if you were to boil it down to the next level of the motivational level that sits just underneath that, would you say that just comes down to stimulation or safety or what is that? Like what's the kind of the driver behind that?
Why do we need stimulation? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, so like someone might accumulate more and more and more.
Yeah.
There's different reasons why they do it. There's the surface level of okay, it's just more money. But if you were to kind of really go deeper into that,
It's because there's no off switch. We lack an off switch.
okay, right.
Okay. Because you might get to a point of thinking, I've got X million in the bank, so that allows me to travel. I don't have to worry about any bills. I'm not really interested in expensive vehicles. I've got a nice property they live in. This allows me to do what I need to do. So you don't feel the need to get any more. For some people, of course, that when they start to accumulate some wealth, what happens is they get a taste for it. And so they want to get up to the next level. So they jump on that hamster wheel in that respect. With other people, that when they get into the wealth, they then find themselves with people that are even wealthier than them, and they want to try and scramble up to be onto the next level. With some people, they have a degree of contentment. No, that'll do me.
Hmm.
Most people don't know how to handle considerable wealth because they're not trained or brought up in it. And it often leads to, you don't have to look at the number of lottery winners that end up spraffing it all on absolute nonsense and end up with disrupted relationships and end up quite miserable because they don't understand how to utilize wealth and they've not grown up with it or move in the appropriate circles. But when it comes to the psychopath, there is no off switch. There's no concept of enough. It's always gain some more, always gain some more. It's like being hungry and you can never have your hunger satiated.
Okay, right. So there it is. So would you say no matter how much money or accumulation of anything you have, there's always this restlessness within you that keeps you wanting more and more? Is that restlessness which is the driver?
Yes. So
Okay, right. Yes.
you
Right.
don't sit and say, yeah, that's enough. The way that one's brain is wired, that isn't a concept. There is a driver within because of the way that one's brain is wired to go, but I can always get more. And if someone were to say, well, you've got all of this, surely that's enough by now. The answer is no, because there is this engine that's running, that's driving to say, and more, and more, and more, and more. In some people, they would simply say that equates to greed, and I can understand how people would describe it as such. But it's not greed in the sake of for the sake of itself. It arises out of the fact that there is an off switch, and there, as I mentioned, there is a hunger that can't be satiated. And so there are, if you like, moments where you'll get to a point and you're like, great, achieve this, fantastic, look at me kind of thing. But then it's short lived because all of a sudden, it's like having a really good meal and then it's digested and then the hunger comes back. And what's also linked to that is the ennui that's lurking on the outside, the boredom. It's like it's like being in the gloom underground and you strike a match and so the darkness recedes. But then that match goes out and the darkness comes back. So you need to do something to make it go again. So you need to find another match. So the fact is, you can never banish that darkness in the sense of you can never banish the boredom because obviously you start doing something and it becomes familiar to you. So then the boredom starts to creep in. And that's why there's a lot of the time it's, I wonder what will happen if I do this. And that's why with certain psychopaths, you find a certain inventiveness. Sometimes it's just directed into being sadistic and cruel to individuals. But in some instances, that curiosity is channeled into more creative realms. What would happen, for instance, if I influenced the government in this way? What would happen if I decided to create this? What would be the outcome of it? And there is that curiosity and drive because of the stimulation. So you have a combination of the ever-present threat of boredom allied with this insatiable hunger that drives the need for accumulation and also stimulation. And as I mentioned earlier on, the attributes of being a psychopath are well suited to deal with those matters. Not in toto, because they never ever go away. But other people who are not equipped as such, they would give up. They'd be like, this is too difficult. It's hard.
Right.
This is too much like hard work. Whereas this is what I'm made for. This is my world.
So every psychopath is like that, right? They just can't switch off. They are.
Yes, but
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. And of course, it's also linked to the extent of their aggressiveness and irritability and the cognitive and executive function. Because, of course, you'll get certain psychopaths where they're driven to do more. So it's, for instance, why is it that they suddenly went out and decided that they were going to try and take a rival gang's drug stash? Because it's stimulating. It's exciting to do that. And they wanted to accumulate more drugs. But because of their lower cognitive function or impulsivity, they make a mistake and they end up getting killed, or they get caught and they're arrested and they end up in prison. So your less effective and lower grade psychopath, if I can describe them as such, often find themselves killed or incarcerated. Your successful psychopaths, which you'd include Epstein in, for example, until, of course, eventually he got caught out. But even the first time around when he had his conviction in, was it 2008 or thereabouts? It was such that he was able to continue to work in an office for 12 hours a day, and he only had to spend part of his time in prison. So even then, he wasn't shackled in the way that many other people were. And he'd created considerable wealth, having, of course, the origins of that wealth remain questionable. Some say he simply stole it from individuals that had inveigled himself with it. Others think that it was seed money provided by intelligence agencies. So there are various theories about where that came from. But thereafter, he was successful in its application because he grew that wealth and he used that wealth to buy influence, to buy credibility, to buy power and control, which stimulated him. He had an extensive network in relation to the sex trafficking that he was involved in. So he was successful in that respect. He wasn't broke. He wasn't in and out of prison.
Yeah.
He wasn't, running around getting shot at. You just think about all of the names of the sort of great and the not so good. that he was involved with that demonstrates how he was able to do that in a successful fashion. And there are other psychopaths that are in a similar operating in the corporate world where they're not running after people with chainsaws, but what they're doing is they are massacring people metaphorically in a corporate environment. Why do they need to go after another company? Because there's no off switch. Why do they need to boost the profits? There's no off switch. Why do they need to asset strip that company? Because it's stimulation. You'll find it with certain lawyers. They'll engage in that behavior. I remember reading there's one particular individual who's a psychopath, and he said the stimulation for him was aggressive cross-examination and copious amounts of cocaine.
Mm.
That's where his stimulation came from.
Right. Okay. So would you say, do you consider psychopathy a strength?
Absolutely.
Okay. Right. You do. Yeah. It's like it helps you to achieve what you want to achieve. That's it. It's efficacy, like you said, helps you to be more
It helps me
efficient.
to achieve, but
Yeah.
it also means, for example, I'm able to do certain things that would either other people would not be able to achieve or they'd be hindered by it. So take, for example, fearlessness. Now, there are certain people that exhibit fearlessness in varying degrees who aren't psychopaths, but it's a psychopathic trait. So you'll see that, for instance, among somebody who might work as a firefighter, their ability to charge into wearing suitable protection, of course, into a burning building or get to a particular height to rescue somebody. That there would be some people who'd say, I just couldn't do that because I'd be too frightened. Certain people where they exhibit that lack of fearlessness, lack of fear in a combat situation. Now, some people are able to function because they fall back on training and being issued with orders
Hmm.
rather than actually sort of thinking for themselves.
Mm.
But others, because of that absence of fear, they are able to do certain things which would have other people paralyzed. I mean, a good example is of the chap who climbed Type I 101, whereby he exhibits fearlessness.
What's
If
that
you
type?
were
What's the 101? Sorry.
Alex, I forget his surname, was it Honan or such like, who climbed, free climbed the building in Taiwan.
Okay. Honnold. Yeah. Alex Honnold.
Yeah,
All right. Yeah.
that's right. Thank
Yeah.
you. So he exhibited fearlessness
Hmm.
because if you were frightened, there's no way you'd be able to sort of hang off the building, waving at people inside and clambering up it like you were going for a stroll in the park. So that enabled him to achieve that far more effectively. So the various attributes enable me to do certain things with that greater level of efficacy compared to
Okay.
people who don't have it.
Just hang
It's
on that fear for a minute, though, actually. Sorry, just to cut in, just in
yeah,
case you're going to move it on to something else. But just if we can we just stay on that for a sec? So,
yes.
would you say that you feel the fear and do it anyway, or would you say just fear doesn't exist for you?
I don't experience the sensation that other people have described as what they feel in a similar situation. So it's a boldness and a bravery whereby I would do certain things and it wouldn't occur to me not to do so. And so when I recall, for instance, when I was younger, and it would equate to, for instance, getting into fights
Mm.
or scaling heights, and friends would go, I'd be shitting myself. And I go, what do you mean? And they say, oh, I couldn't do that. You know, I get jelly legs. And I say, jelly legs. And they go, yeah, a weakness in the legs. Do you not get that? No. Oh, my stomach would be churning. Do you not get that? No, I don't. So I realized from those conversations that what people spoke about in terms of what they experienced, it didn't occur, it didn't happen with me.
Did you have
Remember,
any chemicals though? And did you have any emotional, feeling though, like, just before you're about to do it, and you just reinterpreted it? You kind of put a different descriptor on it, a different label on it.
no,
No.
there's no sort of butterflies or such
Okay.
like.
Right.
It's simply the case of this is what must be done, and I apprehend something that could be problematic for me. I understand, for example, somebody pointing a gun at me, that's a problem. But what I don't do is have an emotional response to it in the way that I understand other people have had.
Do you not think the emotional response can actually be a survival mechanism to help you as well, though?
It might be, for instance, if it causes you to run away, but
Mm.
then again, in such instances, can you get away quick enough? Of course, they talk about this sort of, fight or flight mechanism and such like, and the freeze or fawn and
Hmm.
such like. I'm governed by the application of logic in that situation, which is how do I deal with this threat? I perceive the threat, but there is nothing there that causes me to feel, for instance, a dry mouth or a hammering heart or such like. It's I've got to deal with this. In some instances, that would mean, yeah, retreat is appropriate because I established that overpowering that person isn't an option. The emotional response does serve a purpose, but as I often explain to people, emotional responses invariably are lead to bad decision making because they're generally not founded in logic. Some emotional responses can be helpful, I recognize that, but in the main, they're not. And my preference, where I'm not governed by emotion based decision making, is far superior.
I want to ask you this. If you had the choice, you could only have the narcissism or you could only have the psychopathy, which one would you choose?
Psychopathy.
Right. Okay. Why is that?
Because that is more of what I am, and I see that as something that ultimately is the most effective. And I regard myself as a one man army, one man machine. And I have to essentially tolerate involvement with people as a consequence of, well, there are a lot of them around and they serve a purpose vis-a-vis what I require.
Mm.
But with my psychopathy, there's less of a reliance upon them. The fact is that there's many people on this planet that if we got rid of them, it wouldn't be a problem. And there's a lot of elements of human behavior that I simply do not like and would prefer that they weren't around. And that suits my psychopathy more. And my psychopathy allows me to do certain things which matter to me far more effectively. The narcissism plays a role, but when I look at what I do,
Mm.
I see for me that I gain greater efficacy from my psychopathy. So that's why I would choose it.
Okay. It's a better tool. Yeah, it's a better tool set for you, I guess, to help you reach your goals. So what's your end goal?
The end goal, well, control is the main issue, and I've explained that for all individuals, and particularly for someone who has an innate need for control,
Mm.
death is the ultimate threat to control. So if I was able to do so, I would, and this is why many of my kind have a fixation with immortality, I would want to achieve that.
Mm. Okay.
The reason being, death is a threat to control. I have such a curiosity driven by my need for stimulation that it irritates me that as it stands, I won't know what the world will be like in 200 years.
Mm.
And I want to know that. It also irritates me that there's this vast universe of which there's a massive amount that I've never seen or experienced because it's so far away. I'd want to be able to experience and see that. So, in a sense, the end game would be immortality and a form of sort of omniscience. Now, there's also a realism as a consequence of my logic that I know that the meat suit that I inhabit, marvelous as it is, at some point it has an expiration date.
Mm.
And I've often spoken about how if there was some way of downloading my consciousness into a new meat suit, bring it on. I'd be signing up for that straight away. But assuming that's denied to me, then there is that end game in terms of ensuring there is a legacy, because that would, in my mind,
Mm.
at the point or near to the point of expiration, create a concept of immortality, knowing that my work is going to live on beyond. And the fact is, it might be, for instance, the work of H.G. Tudor is still used for 50, 100 years thereafter. Or it may only be a year or 5 years. But that doesn't matter because at the point, so long as I know that it's going to be there after I've gone,
Mm.
I won't know how long it's lasted because I'll be dead. So for me, the end game is to ensure that I have a legacy that's established and that that's going to live on beyond my life. The other end game is the completion of something called the grand design,
Yeah.
which is in relation to individuals that have wronged me
Hmm.
and that they are met with suitable retribution.
We spoke, yeah. So we actually went into that in the last episode. If people want to watch that, so that's yeah, you wanting to correct the past in your childhood,
That's
you know,
right.
and seek justice to balance the books. You know, you know
Yeah.
that, and we make yeah, we've talked about that quite
Yeah.
in depth.
There's
Makes
no,
sense. Yeah.
that's right. You see, there's no end game in stimulation. That will always be there. There will
Mm.
no end game with accumulation.
Yeah.
The issue of control, that, as I say, death is the ultimate threat. And I found a way that I'll be able to circumvent that.
Through your legacy, you mean?
Yeah.
Like, you know,
The
yeah,
legacy.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
this is probably why there's a big push towards transhumanism because these are psychopaths who cannot get over the fact that they've got billions and trillions, but they don't know how to just do the one thing, and that's just live forever.
Yeah.
So potentially that's why they're coming up with, you know, ways to upload their consciousness into different, you know, clouds or whatever, and they're already
That's right.
thinking about
Well,
this now.
would you want to live forever?
I think I already do. And
Right.
I know so
Okay.
that's
Oh,
just
I
my
see. So
belief
this is a
system.
spiritual belief, is it?
Yeah, that's my belief. I just think this is a meat suit. It's a temporary meat suit. I
Okay.
don't think you can just delete energy like water. You can't delete water. It goes into a different state. I do believe when I die, there is an energy there that will what's the word? Not transcend, transmute into
Hmm.
something else. That transmutation is just that is immortality. Now, whether I transmute into another physical body or something else, or you know something in the environment, that's or like a leaf that goes into the ground and it becomes the compost and then goes back into the earth. I don't know, but I don't believe you just go from something actual to something inactual. I think there is you
Understood.
know a transmutation process. So for me,
Okay.
that's my form of immortality.
Okay.
I'm okay with that.
Fine.
Yeah.
If we put that to one side for a moment,
Yeah.
and I accept the validity of what you're suggesting there, that's a particular belief that you have and one which you're naturally entitled to.
Yeah.
But if we put that to one side, and so it's basically the concept of immortality would be you as I see you today, that you would continue to live on as you forever
Hmm.
in looking the way that you do in the body that you are. You wouldn't be like, the Emperor in Warhammer 40K that's encased in a suit that barely, you don't actually do anything. You're just there as a figurehead kept alive by machines. You actually are able to still do things and leave, you're not drooling and staring out of the window. Would you want to have that, immortality?
No.
Why not?
What thousands and thousands and
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands of millions and millions and millions and millions of years just completely the same
Yeah.
over and over and over again.
Well,
No, no.
well, it doesn't have to be the same. That's up to you.
I'd look the same though. You're saying it would be this meat
You'd
suit.
look the same, but you'd be
Yeah.
able to think of all of the experiences that you could have, all the places that you could visit. Think about the advances in technology that mean that you'd end up traveling to other parts of the solar system, other parts of the galaxy through all of that time.
Hmm.
So many things to discover. And do you see this? For me, that comes back to the stimulation point.
Right. I mean, I think we do that. I think in my belief system, we do that anyway. I do believe there's a certain
Okay.
level of reincarnation that happens. So I think I do. I've had many lifetimes. That's just my own belief. So I think that when I die, there's other, like Quantum Leap, the TV series.
Yeah.
I think that happens anyway. And I think the trick is to think you can only do it in this one meat suit. And imagine you uploaded your consciousness and you're stuck. And then actually imagine if the reality was you've got these millions of lifetimes you can explore in different meat suits and different experiences, and you've just stuck to the
Mm.
one. That's terrifying. Imagine if you found that out. How would you feel then?
Well, I rather like the meat suit that I'm in, actually. It's quite attractive and rather effective, such like. Um, I certainly want to be able to do things. So I'm not particularly interested in sort of taking on a different, uh, so that I would look physically different to the way that I do now. I
Mm.
would simply want to be at a point whereby I would still have function and a level of good health that would enable me to move around, think, process, etc. Basically, as I am today
Mm.
would perfectly suit me if I stayed as I am for millennia. So I could then
Mm.
go and achieve and experience all of these other things.
Fair enough. No, that makes sense from your perspective. I get that.
Yeah,
So, all right. So, are you with your psychopathy, let's say, do you feel, I mean, I know we spoke about this earlier that there's that constant restlessness,
yeah.
but do you feel like you have satiated that restlessness, that feeling of hunger, or do you still feel that, or do you feel like you're content with how you're going about your day, going about your life at the moment?
There are, as I mentioned earlier, it's a little bit like climbing, and
Mm.
then you'll reach a ledge, and there'll be a moment of, yeah, this is good, what's been done.
The
But
next
then
one.
all of a sudden the clouds part and there's some more to climb, so off we go again.
Right. Okay. Yeah. It's like, so you said before, you get that sense of achievement, but then it's like the light goes out in the
Yeah,
room, and it's you back to square
fleeting.
one. Or you've climbed one mountain, it's like, right, next one. It's that kind of
Exactly.
thing.
There's
Right.
always some, there is always more to gain. There is always more mountains to climb. There are more people to conquer. There
Yeah.
are new horizons to explore. There are new things to understand. There's new knowledge to acquire. There's new people to meet. There's always more.
There's always more. There's always more.
And I have no inbuilt sense of contentment.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's what
Where it
drives
is,
you on. That's what
it's
drives you on. So you
yeah,
become, so in a way, that's why you see it as a superpower because it drives you to do more and more. Whereas some people are like the goats that graze on the side of the mountain. You're a
yeah,
mount. You get to one peak. And you've done that mountain. Next mountain. So that's why you see it as a useful tool. Yeah.
yes.
Okay. So is this what you teach to other people? So you would actually teach to someone some psychopathic tactics because you're drawing out the positives of the psychopath and
Mm.
you're modeling that out for people, yes, and you're saying this is actually helpful for you and it helps you play in this world that we're in, which is probably built by psychopaths anyway, right? Is that what you
Mm.
do? You kind of take out the positive strands of the psychopath that actually help you perform better in the world, and you give that to your clients, do you?
In essence, it's founded around the application of logic, not being governed by emotional responses.
Sure.
The and assessing information, utilizing evidence, and making logic-based decisions, and training and teaching people to create an operating system based on that as best they can. One has to understand they are built differently to me, therefore they are never going to get to the same position as me. I'm sure some of them would say they thank their own personal God for that. But in terms of the thought process and decision making, that is what I encourage them to do because it brings all manner of rewards for them and helps them avoid poor decision making, which then leads to poor outcomes for them. So that's the major thing. I can't, for instance, I can't teach them fearlessness,
Mhm.
but what I can do is cause them to have a greater reliance upon logic, which of itself will reduce poor emotional outcomes. Therefore, by going to the evidence and going to the logic, they won't allow, for example, their emotions to run away with them so that they're affected by fear or anxiety to the extent that they once were. So, a simple example of that is they are in bed at night and they hear a bang from downstairs. Their mind immediately goes to Billy Burglar's in here or Ron the rapist, and they start panicking. The point is, if you allow that panic to subsume you, you will be paralyzed and ineffective. And either, if your suspicions are correct that there is an intruder, you're likely to come off badly. Or if there isn't, you will remain frightened for quite a period of time, which is not good for you. It's not a pleasant experience for you. So it's about understanding your reaction is not based on any evidence. You heard a sound. You now need to take certain steps. So you could take steps, for instance, to call the police so they're on their way.
Mhm.
You could have a weapon nearby, so you can arm yourself with that. And then you could take steps, for instance, to make a noise, turn on the lights, because most intruders, if they know that somebody is awake, they will depart because they're not there invariably for the person. They're there really to steal. They're a burglar. And if they're a rapist, they want to be able to do so because that's about power and control. If they are alert to the fact that you are know that they're there, they've lost the element of surprise, and it's likely then to cause them to back off. And so you can then head down the stairs slowly. You can call out in as confident voice as you can muster, enter the living room, turn the light on, and then you see your cat's knocked a vase over.
Mm.
Immediate relief. It's not Billy Burglar, it's a cat. You went to the evidence. You didn't allow yourself to be governed by fear and anxiety. It was still there. You were probably trembling as you came down the stairs. But what you did was, rather than remain sweating under the duvet, not knowing what was going on, because you didn't know for certain that there was an intruder, you just immediately assumed that there was. And often you're wrong. And so you take steps to protect yourself so that if it is an intruder, they will most likely depart, because statistically, that's what's most likely to happen. And you also go and find out what's going on, and you learn actually it wasn't an intruder, it was something else, and therefore you have the relief. So it's action, and those are the logical responses, that if you allowed yourself to be governed by the emotion, you would have had terrible outcomes. Instead, you go to a logical approach to it. Self-preservation, steps taken to protect yourself, steps to find out what's going on. There you are, much better outcome for you. And it's encouraging people to go to the evidence and to apply a logical approach. And I do that across so many aspects of their life. And that's how I'm governed.
Yeah, so it's not just the burglar. I'm guessing this is all different types of domains and contexts, right? That you're
Yeah,
helping
oh,
people with.
absolutely.
Yeah,
There's lots of
yeah.
different scenarios where
Mm.
repeatedly people come to me and they'll say something and I say to them, yeah, the operative word there was seem or assume or feel. And all of those things lead to inaccuracies. You need to start applying logic and going to the evidence rather than. It's astonishing how
Mm.
many people will make an assumption about something and not realize that's what they're doing. And regularly, because my mind operates on logic, I will pull them up about that. And I'll say, how do you know that? And they go, well, they told me. I said, so you believe what they've told you? Yeah, I suppose. So you didn't think to try and find that out through verification through a third party or documentation? No. Well, that's what you should be thinking of doing. And then you actually find out whether what you've been told is accurate or not, rather than relying on somebody who is likely to be a pathological liar. So
Mm.
it's again utilizing the application of logic rather than a very slipshod. This is why, you see,
Mm.
this is also part of the reason why we have so many victims, in that there are people who are utterly susceptible to being manipulated. They stand out and can be seen by my kind as that person is ripe for the manipulation. Anybody can be manipulated, but some people are harder to manipulate than others. And there are certain individuals, they are walking around with targets on their back, and they make it so easy.
That's why society puts people into a state of fear and confusion nearly all the time. That's what the
Hmm.
news probably the main role is. I mean, look at the COVID era. Don't want to go into that just for, I've done so many shows on this, but look, just mass formation psychosis everyone was in. Just completely walking around like zombies, just doing the most ridiculous things, just following orders, just because they're in such a state of panic and fear. So
Well,
we know how people, yeah, yeah,
precisely.
yeah,
Ask questions. It's about encouraging critical thinking,
mm,
the application of verifiable and valid evidence, the utilization of logic. And the fact is, don't rely just on that one piece of information. Only today, for example, I was reading a newspaper which you'd largely think, it's not a tabloid.
mm,
And it was talking about Epstein. And what was it engaging in? It was discussing the possibility that he was a Russian agent.
Yeah.
Now, in this article,
Mm.
it didn't make any mention whatsoever of the possibility that he might have been an asset or an agent
It's-
linked to Mossad,
Yeah.
which many people have speculated about. So here you have a major newspaper that is already engaging in that presentation of only a certain set of information. They're not giving you the whole picture for you to make a determination as to what might have been governing his behavior. They're just saying to you, it's likely he was a Russian agent. It was likely he was a Russian agent. And
Mm.
they don't even mention the possibility of Mossad. And this is a supposedly credible newspaper. Another one, a day or two ago, published a picture of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor in his car, waving and smiling. And they basically, their agenda was to lambast him because, of course, he's nowadays deemed a complete degenerate. So what does he think he's doing? Waving at the public. Look at him. What a shit. He doesn't give a damn about anybody. He's waving and laughing. Well, if you actually looked at the full picture rather than the cropped one that this newspaper, a supposedly credible newspaper, had put forward, you'd have seen that there was a child waving at him. So he was just waving in response. But they gave you the crop picture to make it seem like here's this arrogant buffoon who doesn't give a shit about all of what's going on around him at the moment. He's laughing and waving as if he hasn't got a care in the world. And once again, if you'd bothered to go and find a larger picture and read around it, in the scheme of things, it's fairly inconsequential, but it's a useful example again of how the media will only serve a particular agenda. And that's why it's important as part of this evidence gathering to go to a range of different sources.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's part of that process of not to automatically accept what you're being told.
You don't need to be a. I wouldn't say you need to be a psychopath. Though. I mean, because when you were talking
No,
here,
no,
because
no, you don't.
you're an aware psychopath, right?
That's right.
So that means that you're able to access logic without the contamination of emotion. I'm not saying emotion's bad necessarily, but for you, you perceive it that way, and maybe that is the case. If people have fear, then they're unable to separate the logic from the emotion. That's kind of what you're saying here. But I mean, in a
Yeah.
bizarre kind of weird way, if you were to have an aware psychopath, would they be worth having in top positions of power, or are you saying that it comes with too many consequences?
It depends on, it would depend upon your appropriate world view. So, for example, at one point in time, there was a suggestion made by the British government that looking at post nuclear war reconstruction in the United Kingdom, that the best people to put in positions of authority would be psychopaths because they would be less affected by what had
Yeah,
happened.
right.
Okay. So there is a logic to that. Fearless individuals who are less likely to suffer from trauma, post traumatic stress disorder, etc., that they are individuals whereby, as a consequence of the need for stimulation and accumulation, they'd be quite driven individuals. So there's a logic there. Put them in control of resources for the rebuilding of Britain, if that was indeed possible post
Mm.
nuclear attack. That raises a different question, but we won't go there. Of course, another school of thought would say you're putting psychopaths in charge of resources. They are basically self-focused and impulsive. They will use the resources for themselves and whoever they deem that's supportive of them, and they won't do it for the greater good of individuals. You're dealing with individuals who have no emotional empathy,
Mm.
and therefore they won't give a shit about everybody else. They'll just line their own pockets. So there is an argument that they would be the best, and what you might come to the conclusion is, well, of the range of available options, they are the best one, even though they come with some risks.
Mm.
And I think that's ultimately, there are certain psychopaths, because of their low executive function and their inability to cope with their impulsivity, who you just wouldn't bother with in the slightest, because they're as likely to stab you as they are to smile at you. And therefore, that's not going to be useful to you. But as I mentioned earlier on, there is the concept of the successful psychopath. There is always a potential downside because of the absence of emotional empathy for certain individuals, but the upside is far greater. And therefore, there is a compelling argument that such an individual with a higher executive function is exactly what's required to make the difficult decisions unhindered by emotional distraction. And with the hyper focus. For example, many brilliant surgeons are successful psychopaths because they are able to focus. They don't go, ooh, I'm cutting into a body. There's no hesitation. It's, I need to get the job done. That they don't experience the anxiety. So they aren't, with a shaking hand. They're intelligent and they're focused on the task. They want to succeed. So that's why you often find that there are many successful psychopaths who are brilliant surgeons. And
If you had
that's
the
who you
choice,
want.
though, would you have a, if someone says, I'm going to be cutting your body open tomorrow, I'm a psychopath, would you choose them, or would you choose someone who wasn't a psychopath?
If they were freely admitting that to me, that would cause me to think, because you're giving that information to me, that's affecting the balance of control here, so I'll decline.
Oh.
If I knew that individual was a psychopath, but they didn't go around admitting it, I'd say, get to work.
Okay, so you would actually, if you were to, I mean, it's a purely hypothetical, but if you knew that they were a psychopath, you'd be okay with them doing the surgery on you.
If I was dealing with an intelligent psychopath, I would prefer that
Okay.
to a different individual.
So okay, so you don't worry about psychopaths wanting to, like a Harold Shipman. I mean, that is that a psychopath, or what is that then? Someone who just gets a kick out of killing people? Is that I thought that was a psychopath, like a Patrick Bateman type.
Well, I mean, obviously, Bateman, there's a whole debate there as to you might argue really that Bateman's more of a narcissist than a psychopath because one of the central tenets of it is did it really happen or did he invent it all?
Hmm.
Because, for example, he goes into the club
Hmm.
and he offers some beer tokens, and the waitress says those aren't valid here, and she turns her back to prepare the drinks, and he says something along the lines of, I want to stab you and play with your blood. She doesn't react to what he says. Is that because the music's too loud and she never heard him and he did say it? Or is this just what he would have preferred to have said to her in his own deluded fantasy, which is links him more to being a narcissist? So, and there are various instances of that. For example, he fires the gun and he blows the police car up, and he looks at the gun as if to say, "How did that happen?" So and I don't think Bret Easton Ellis would ever answer the question. It's part of the allure of his writing, which is Bateman an out and out psychopath? And that's what's being described, or more accurately, a narcissistic psychopath. Or is he just a pure narcissist whereby none of these things happen and he's just a cookie cutter vice president who wishes that he could do all of these things but doesn't actually do so?
Because he's accumulating, isn't he?
Yes, so if we accept that he is a narcissistic psychopath, what do you have? Well, he asserts control over people in a variety of ways. He flatters women and to get them into bed. He uses his wealth to assert control over
Hmm.
people, membership of clubs. He has some intelligence, which he exhibits with regard to the things that he talks about. Stimulation, accumulation are encapsulated very well by Easton Ellis, because you, of course, get those chapters where Bateman goes into huge detail, for instance, about a sound system. And that shows that he wants to accumulate the best sound systems and that he's stimulated by talking about all of the ins and outs of the makeup of that sound system. Furthermore, the stimulation of, do you like Huey Lewis and the News? And he talks about all of the various aspects of that music, whilst then he then goes and gets an axe and kills Paul Allen. He furthermore, there's the accumulation of, he always talks about, and it's linked again to the stimulation. I had drinks with Bryce. He was wearing a Valentino suit, a Ralph Lauren shirt. He describes every detail because his mind is focused on the stimulation of picking up what everybody's wearing, that he actually has a fascination with the inanimate aspect of both people and objects because everything's an object to him.
Hmm.
So he's stimulated by these detailed descriptions, and Easton Ellis gets that very well in the writing of certain chapters where it's almost like an information overload.
Well, and you spoke about accumulating sex.
Yeah,
We even have a concept now. It's called body count. It's like the
yeah,
new
yeah,
term for this. So that's a psychopath wanting to accumulate more and more girls into bed, what, for instance, like your body count. But he's also the body count in terms of killing people, right?
That's right.
So that's the
Yeah.
psychopathy there, is it? Accumulating body counts in both definitions.
With there is an accumulation of the body count, but also with the body count that occurs, assuming that is accurate and isn't pure fantasy, part of that is linked to his impulsivity, whereby, for
Mm.
example, when he stops with the homeless man, okay, and basically his psychopathy would be saying, assert control over this individual, but also, what's this man's story? How will he react if you offer him something? So he bends down and he says to you, "Are you cold?" And he opens his suitcase saying, "I've got something for you here." And then his lack of emotional empathy and his need for control and his need for stimulation and the accumulation of body count is affected by his impulsivity, whereby he produces a knife and he stabs the homeless man repeatedly. So he kills him, and then he turns and he stamps on his dog and kills his dog
Oh,
also. Now, that arose out of, there was a moment of, I wonder what my interaction with this homeless man will be like. Might I do something for him? And then, because of his absence of emotional empathy, his contempt for him, because he says, God, you smell real bad, you smell like shit. And he goes, beggars can't be choosers. And it's like, yes, they can choose to get a job. His impulsivity is such that he goes down the route of, I'm just going to off him. But that provides stimulation by virtue of stabbing him. There's the accumulation, of course, because it adds to his body count.
mhm.
But it's governed by the engine of the absence of emotional empathy and his impulsivity.
Mhm. So if we know, I mean, that would you say that's fairly accurate to some psychopaths then?
Yes, the fact is that the impulsivity aspect works both ways, whereby something can occur which will trigger a psychopath to suddenly lash out, and in other instances, they may well be bent on thinking, "I'm going to go and kidnap somebody," and then they hear a song, and it's almost like a Labrador chasing after a butterfly, and then go, "Oh, look, a rabbit," and then going off in a different direction. So with certain psychopaths, the impulsivity leads them to suddenly lose interest in one thing. And so certain people, and there have been notable examples of this, were actually targeted as a potential victim of a psychopath. And they later found out that they were spared, not by the psychopath going, "Oh, I've decided I'm not going to kill you," but basically, yeah, I was going to go in through that window and take the woman that lived there. This is when the psychopath later admits to what they've been doing. Say, I was going to go through that window and abduct her, but then I heard this song and it reminded me of something else, so I decided not to do it. And there's that there's that impulsivity that
Shiny
occurs.
objects, sort of like, yeah, getting
Yeah,
pulled, like squirrel, that kind of thing, like
that's
that's
right.
the
That's
impulsivity there.
right. Yeah.
So what's the differentiation here between a psychopath that gets a kick out of killing people and a psychopath that chooses not to do that? Like, so why do you get what I'm saying here? Is that some would lead, is it just choice, like personal preference, or why would one psychopath want to kill lots of people and one wouldn't?
Well, part of it is linked to the impulse control
Mm.
and also was linked to the issue of with having a higher executive function. So, for example, I don't go around committing a bloodbath because well, that'd be a very stupid thing to do. Because then it's likely I would attract the attention of the authorities, who then might look to arrest me. And as a consequence of that, that would stop me doing all of the other things that I enjoy doing.
Okay.
Whereas a less, a different type of psychopath lacks the intelligence and the impulse control. So I have a greater level of impulse control.
Mm.
It's
Yeah.
still, there's still impulsivity that's there, but the difference is that as a successful psychopath, I can rein in some of those tendencies to a greater degree, or where I don't, I'm more effective at giving into them in a way whereby I'm less likely to suffer a downside. So, an example you see that with others, whereby they will engage in criminal activity, but because they're powerful and because they're able to rely upon other individuals as fixers and so forth, the reach of the law doesn't get close to them. And we see this again, going back to Epstein and the individuals that have been who get named and have been suspected of being involved in abuse of individuals. Many of these individuals are facing, they've not even been investigated, there's no prosecution, there's nothing, because they're able to attend to their whims, but because of their power and influence, they're able to prevent the downside by way of the threat to control, the need to manage that control. They're effective at doing so. It's in essence, it comes down to often a line between the higher executive function, the lower executive function, and access to wealth and the poor. A poor, stupid psychopath is likely they'll give in to their impulse control, and then they are easy to find, easy to arrest, and they've got no means of wriggling out of it.
Got it. Right. Okay. So, because I was thinking before that all psychopaths have like a quite a good sense of awareness and everything's based on a logical structure, like you said before. But
No,
no,
no.
that's just
So
the aware ones. Okay. Right.
yeah, so that's linked, of course, to a higher executive function. There are those, to put it bluntly, they're not particularly bright. They give in to their impulse control, and they don't have access to the resources, so that basically authority comes knocking, and these are the ones that end up in prison again and again and again.
Right. Okay. Yeah. You're the aware one though, so you can actually see everything playing out in front of you. You can preempt things. You can work out different timelines that could occur, different permutations, all happening all at once, and you've got like a mind that's like a super parallel processor to kind of work it out, and therefore
Yes.
you're making very sensible decisions based upon the ramifications of that.
Yeah, added to which,
Right.
if there was any suggestion of some form of interference from the authorities which would threaten my need for control, I'm suitably resourced and influenced, and individuals that I know, that I would be able to send them in a different direction. Mean that, for example, you will get individuals who they will hire very expensive and
Mhm.
very talented lawyers, whereby they will just bury the prosecution so it doesn't go anywhere.
Bury them, yeah, in terms of in the legal proceedings, though, yeah. You,
Yes,
yeah, yeah,
or you can go further,
yeah.
whereby a powerful individual will arrange for certain witnesses to disappear,
Disappear, yeah,
and it's
okay,
not and
right, yeah.
it's not linked to them. You can't prove a causal link between that person and the disappearance of that individual.
And of course, the psychopath has no guilt or shame. Not, or should we say, it probably is deep down, but it's been so buried that they just operate from no guilt, no shame,
Yeah,
right?
everything's up for grabs. Everything's a game. The game is always being played. There is no guilt to rein it in. So they're just pieces on a board that need to be moved out of the way.
Like clearing out a pawn on a game of chess. You don't care,
Yeah.
you sacrifice it. It's a bit like how these world leaders can just do airstrikes on innocent civilians and not even blink an eye.
Yes, because they're just objects.
Yeah.
And what matters to them is, for instance, the application of control against another country. And with that, it is inevitable that there are collateral consequences. Those collateral consequences would keep other people up at night. They won't
Yeah.
with the psychopath.
And that's also why they have you noticed the linguistic changes, the semantic changes to suit the psychopathic motives. So instead of it just being mass murder, it will be like collateral damage,
Oh, absolutely.
or even I mean you could think what you like about this, but people that when they abort their babies, they deliberately use Latin words to describe the baby because they know it distances themselves from it more. Like fetus, you have less of an emotional connection to fetus as you would the word baby. So
Yep,
that's why they would use terminology like that to dehumanize first, right? So that it
precisely.
feels more palatable.
Why do you
Yeah.
think I refer to people as appliances?
Right. Yeah, so so it goes back to what we said before, the kind of the language bubbles up from the paradigm, from
That's
the
right.
axioms, the principles. Yeah,
Yep.
okay. So look, here's a question, all right? Now, tell me if this is going too far or not, but like if you could get away with it, would you just kill loads of people? Don't have to if you don't want to, but like what if you could, hypothetically though?
When you say kill loads of people, do you mean just what, wipe them out all at once, or go around on some form of killing spree intermittently? What's the context.
What floats your boat?
I'd be more stimulated by eradication of individuals on an ongoing basis rather than a sort of mass blowout all at once.
So you would like what's his name? Douglas in that what's that movie called? Is it where he goes into the takeaway place and he looks
Oh,
at the
you mean
little
falling
burger.
down?
Yeah, is it? Would it be more like that? Like you, I just
Well, I wouldn't be eating there, but
no, no, no.
um, there is an element of that. There
Yeah.
are individuals that need to be disincentivized, and I find it stimulating to do so.
So if you had it your way and you could get away with it, hypothetically, would you just walk around with like a machine gun and just take out all the useless eaters?
Oh, I do it in a far more sophisticated fashion than just mowing them down like that. I'd have some fun with them first before I offed them.
Really? Like
Oh,
what sort of thing?
absolutely.
What sort of thing would you do with them?
I'd torture them.
Oh my, wow. Okay, so that's actually like the ultimate desire then is to torture them, kill them. It is like Patrick Bateman then, right?
It would be part of the fact of one of the aspects that provides stimulation to me
Yeah,
is breaking the other individual. Okay.
yeah.
So training an automatic weapon on a group of people and mowing them down isn't particularly satisfying. It'd be mildly entertaining because, oh, look at that, as they've all been zapped, and look at me asserting that control over them. But there's no finesse to it. And so identifying an individual and organizing their abduction, and thereafter watching the confidence and spirit drain from them
Mm.
without even necessarily laying a finger on them is supremely satisfying. Breaking their will so that they've subsumed to my control. Anybody ultimately can point a gun and pull the trigger. Some people might not even be able to do that because fear and emotional empathy would prevent them, but it's rather rudimentary. And for
Mm.
one such as I, there's far more to be gained by the extraction of that individual. And understand, it wouldn't be done in an arbitrary fashion. There are people that deserve this to happen to. And therefore, I wouldn't be a case of, oh, I'll just pluck that person off the street. That's easy. Again, there's no stimulation really in doing that. It would be the identification of individuals that I would deem that are necessary for disincentivization, that I would then effect their abduction, break their will, then engage in the stimulation of seeing their reaction to the application of a particular skill set, and then they'd be offed.
So who would these people be then? People in positions of high status that you want to see taken down?
There are certain individuals whereby I have, for personal reasons, a desire to take them out of the equation. I also, as a consequence of what happened to me as a child, have a particular penchant for wanting to get child abusers.
Mm, I
So I would
see.
readily identify those individuals, and I doubt I'd come across much resistance to my plans in that regard. I think most people would thoroughly endorse
Yeah,
them.
I'm all for that. I'm all for that. Let's go.
Mhm.
But so let's just say that you've dealt with all the people that have had a direct
Yeah.
effect on your childhood. You've also dealt with everyone that's indirectly, been a part of your childhood in terms of there's an association, child abuse, stuff like that.
Yes.
Taken them all out. Now you're just walking down the street. You can do anything you want. Is there still a hierarchy of would you still go after people that have high status, or would they have to do something to you for you to want to torture them, or if
They
you could
wouldn't
do anything you
necessarily
want?
have to do something to me. I think, but sort of a random attack on somebody
Yeah.
is beneath me. It's not with the
Okay.
finesse that I see myself as having. I think what I would do would look to identify individuals whereby, again, I'd want to break them and test them. So it would be individuals that think they're all that think that they're special. And so as a consequence of doing so, it'd almost be a little bit like creating scenarios in the Saw movies so that we get them and so I could play games with those particular individuals because that would be stimulating. But they thoroughly deserve to be there. It'd almost be a case of I would plan the abduction of certain individuals, and then I'd have a television program, and there'd be four individuals, and I would explain who this person was and what their rap sheet is, and then the public could vote for who's going to go into HG's House of Horrors, and then in they go. So I'd make a shitload of money from it. The public would adore me for it, and we would dispense with basically a piece of shit. So everyone's a winner apart from them. And we're not going to mourn the loss of that individual. So
I don't know why I'm laughing, but I'm just imagining like the Psychopath games or something, and you've got this or House of Horrors, and
yeah.
we've got James Corden in there, and you're doing like the Saw.
Oh, Corden would be long gone by this stage.
Oh, you wouldn't torture him. You'd come on. You surely you would have a little bit of fun with him, wouldn't you?
Oh, indeed, but he's very much on that initial list. So
He's on the initial list, right?
mm.
So you would. So in an ideal world for you, your wet dream, your utopia would be you'd go after people that think that they've got a bit something special about them, and you want to knock them down a peg or two because that knocking them down a peg or two satisfies your need for feeling superior, have the control, knowing that you can break them, gives you a certain power uplift, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
Being what I am, there's little to be gained by getting Joe public and giving them a hard time. That's easy pickings.
Right.
I want the individuals that think that they're in their rarefied stratosphere and their ivory towers. So I want the con artists, and I want the perverts, and I want the bent politicians, and I want those individuals that are the moronic purveyors of brain dead content.
Yeah, you're going for like I was going to say queen bees, but if they're doing moronic content, then no. But like you're going after the certain. Well, maybe they're not the queen bees because the queen bee has a certain, important, pivotal role within a structure. But actually, you're going for not the queen bees, but they stand out in society, but for the wrong reasons. Is
Mm.
that kind of what we're saying? Yeah.
It's a little bit similar to how you can't con an honest person. It's invariably you're going after someone who's
Mm.
greedy, uh, that they've got this flaw about them. And so I would identify those individuals that would they merit being subjected to this, and also because of what they are, it would cause such a problem for them to be put in such a situation that their reactions would be far more satisfying for me.
Right.
Plucking Joe Ordinary off the street and subjecting them to it, all that would happen is they get really upset, they plead, and then they die. And well, that was a bit boring.
Right.
I
Yeah.
want the individual who try and be defiant with me. You're not going to do this to me. Or then to see the individual who's cocky as hell in the world and then is reduced to a sniveling worm of a coward when they find themselves up against a superior being. That's far more satisfying to break the will of those individuals because it plays into the stimulation that I require.
Now, okay. So is that your stimulation, or would you say that that is how most psychopaths, think?
No, it. There may be others that would think in a similar way to me. Not all would do so. I'm talking here a
Just
very particular personal approach with regard to the individuals that I would go for. There'd be others whereby they'd be far more arbitrary than I am, that they wouldn't be as discerning.
right. Okay. So different psychopaths. So some psychopaths would just kill the Joe blogs because it's just
They would
impulsive. Impulsive.
they would walk
Right.
down a high street tossing hand grenades.
Right, they would. Okay, right. Because I'm thinking here that if we're saying that most world leaders are psychopaths, I don't,
Yeah,
or like a good high percentage are, right?
yeah,
I think you almost have to be to kind of rise to that level, right?
yes,
Why is it that they don't take each other out at that level if there is this thing about, like Patrick Bateman when someone else shows him the business card
yeah.
and it's a slightly better business card than his, he's like, you can see that he wants to kill this guy, right? Now, I'm
Hmm.
just wondering if you have all these like world leaders and they're all, let's say, psychopathic, why is it that they almost act in like a swarm consciousness where they all achieve the same goal? There isn't any so much infighting. I mean, there might be a certain level of that, but there's a
Well,
general,
there is infighting in the way
yeah,
that remember. So let's take for example those psychopaths that have access to a nuclear arsenal.
yeah,
Okay, they're not unhinged in the sense they recognize that they fire off those nuclear missiles.
Mm.
It's mutually assured destruction. And that psychopath rather likes existing, therefore not going to do it. And where's the accumulation there? You're destroying everything. So that psychopath has accumulated so much that they don't want to lose it. So instead, what happens is you get more of the game playing in terms of trading insults, the grey warfare that takes place, cyber attacks which are done that provide the stimulation and the accumulation through those routes. An out and out attack is self-defeating.
On the populace, the general populace, but what about the other world leader that they're kind of competing at the same sort of level? Why don't they take each other out?
Well, who says that they don't attempt to do so, but they don't succeed in doing it? And that's why they have considerable
Hmm.
security details.
They all turn up to Davos, let's say, and they're all like, shaking hands and hugging each other and all like playing. It seems like they're singing from the same hymn sheet. But I would have thought that
Yeah,
that's like
but
a
there's no.
psychopath's nightmare, isn't it? Like having other people that are kind of on their level and competing.
Well, there's also the recognition, of course, that those individuals may prove of use. So you're not necessarily, and remember, those type of individuals are your successful psychopaths. They're not your impulsive, arbitrary, capricious ones that have wind up in prison.
Right.
They've got to a position whereby they've reined in certain impulsive behaviors and they rather like the position that they're in. They will also recognize that if they suddenly start going around trying to machine gun down every other leader, well, guess what's going to happen? Plenty of people are going to come after them as well. They're not stupid.
Got you. Okay. Yeah, that explains a lot about how politics is done, worldwide. It kind of
Mm.
explains a lot of things. Yeah. All right. HG, thank you. Went on, again, it's such a good chat. I forget, I don't even look at the clock and it just is timeless. So, credit to you. This is such a interesting subject. I mean, I could talk to you all day, but I'm going to be respectful of your time.
Thank you.
Let's wrap up and, maybe we can do another part two as well, if that's okay.
Absolutely, yes.
Because
I'd be
it's
pleased to
great.
do so. We can organise that. No
We'll
problem.
organise that. Can you just mention the book? By the time people watch this, I think the book will probably be out. The description, the book's in the description below. But do you just sort of let people know what they're going to get from that book as well?
Yes, so the book, The Psychopath, which will either be out or will be out shortly at the time of John and I speaking, it's not quite finished. In there is a series of explanations about the behavior of the psychopath as a whole, explanations about my behavior and my psychopathy, ranging from my childhood into adulthood. So you understand the different perspectives, the motivators, that you gain a greater understanding of the way that the psychopath sees the world. In a way, it's like being able to clamber into the mind of the psychopath and see the world through a psychopath's eyes. So it's particularly insightful.
Perfect. All right, good. Well, look, if that's probably going to be by the time you watch this video, it's probably going to be out. If not, just wait a little while and then you'll be able to get that book. But HG, this is just yes, so much, and there's so much more as well. That's
Well,
the thing.
we'll talk on another
We'll
occasion.
talk on
So,
another occasion. But
absolutely.
okay, thanks a lot, my man, and yeah, we'll speak soon. Okay.
Okay. Thanks, John.